So my name is Raymond Diaz. This is my SUD 101 week 2 assignment. I am going to be making a video, 10-minute video pertaining to the assignment for week 2, which is writing an essay, create a video or a slideshow in regards to what is addiction to me, my take on it. I'm gonna be covering an addiction story of someone. This one's myself. Use the course materials to define addiction, which I will do. Explain how I met the definition criteria described in the course materials. Describe how which model of addiction I resonate with the most, and describe how this addiction story fits within the model. Provide a reflection on how you previously understood addiction and your renewed understanding given through the content and resources from weeks 1 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to start this off with my material. In this video, I will incorporate it not step by step, but in the process of reading this and explaining my story. So my addiction story, from my perspective, is based on my lived experience in life. So as for me, the model of addiction that I chose to resonate with is the biopsychosocial model, and in this model I resonate with the bio and social part of this the most. How this model fits into my addiction story is that the bio is that a person in my life, and the genetic makeup and the family trees that I come from unfortunately passed down genes of addiction and other mental health issues that have played a big part in my life story, and ultimately the demise and downfall of my life at a certain point, and in the end of the madness that I lived and put myself in. Um, the story of recovery. I share this because genetically I was predestined to be an alcoholic, which runs rapid in my family history of men and women who abuse and use drugs and alcohol. Also, in the midst of all this, the people, the places, and the things in my environments that ultimately also set the tone for my madness in years of drug abuse, mental health, and the life of gangs, violence, jails, you name it. I will explain shortly as far as my reflection of how I previously understood addiction in the in depth clarification of the biopsychosocial aspect of it. I knew from other programs, I've been in other programs before because I've gotten in trouble prior to me changing and things of that nature. And through these programs, I've learned that, alcoholism and addiction is genetic. At first I was like, genetic? How's that? So it kind of explained things for me, at least in the beginning when I learned that. Yet I still ran rapid and, you know, made the choices in my life to do what I did, but I kind of knew it was already genetic from the other programs that addiction and alcoholism is genetic, but to see the social and psycho part of it explained has given me a broader perspective on things. So this answering the model of addiction that I chose. So just seeing it more in depth and breaking it down and having it broken down for me to understand really social, the genetic part, and the mental part of it. It just made it clear to me, and made it a more understanding of what I got going on. And for example, how my genetic makeup and environment was affected by substance abuse. Sharing that these triggers and the cause had a profound and ripple effect on my other genes. All right. So for me, my story of addiction comes into play since I was little. You know, as for me, I was that kid that and when we were little and we learned dare. They were like, "Oh, dare! Don't do drugs. Dare this." I'm like, "What's that? Dare? I want to try it now." You know what I'm saying? That was just the way I was. See, I was born hyper. I was born into a single mother. My dad he was in a gang. He had the life. He lived that lifestyle. I was ultimately later on, I was a child out of wedlock. You know what I mean? My dad had a wife prior, and another family, and so ultimately I came about, right? And my dad was very abusive. He beat my mom and things like that. So I'm sure genetically down the line it was affecting me emotionally even before I came out, right? The anger, the pain, the screaming that my mom felt ultimately genetically came to me. The trauma, right? And when I came out, I was a bad kid my whole life, from the age of, you know, getting a lot emotional, but from like 4 to 3 years ago, I'm 40 now. You know, my life has been always been in trouble. I had, see, I had a little kid. I guess I had ADD, ADHD, OCD, impulse control disorder, fits of rage. I didn't find these out until I was already like 16 years old, going to jail already, going to camp and things like that. See, I was born in '84, and in this time, the early '90s, these things were, uh, they were taboo. You know, my mom didn't know how to deal with, you know, what is this? Why is he so bad? And you know what I mean? Not knowing that it was probably genetically built for me that way. You know what I'm saying? And my addiction story comes from, you know, as a kid. As a kid, I started teenager early, 13 years old. My environment, you know, I live in like, we lived in San Fernando Valley, Reseda. I grew up in Reseda, Canoga, Van Nuys, all over the San Fernando Valley. But San Fernando Valley is with the business, you know what I'm saying? It's not Compton, Crenshaw, whatever, but it holds its own, right? And so to that effect, you know, I started smoking weed at a young age, and I was hooked like that. You know what I mean? I loved the way it felt. Maybe for my chemical imbalance in me, you know, I ran with it. So you know, at that time, it wasn't really that much, you know, drugs. It was weed, of course, stress weed, and it wasn't even the chronic yet. Um, you know, there was biker dope. It was crack for sure, and you know, LSD, mushrooms, things like that. So as a kid, I always had open mind, and I was very intrigued on situations in life. So I'm gonna try to hurry this up, but yeah, you know, so any chance I got to explore and figure things out, I did it. You know what I'm saying? So it went from the weed, then it went to the acid. You know, as I went to high school, things of that nature. The acid, I was into huffing paint, fried my brain, and at one point I was eating hallucinogens. I learned about these plants. Um, Jimson weed, Hell's Bells, Morning Glory. You know, it's called Datura. You know what I'm saying? Somebody had mentioned, hey, if you eat this plant, you'll fry and you do this. And so, sure enough, my ass, I did. One time I was walking home from somewhere. My grandma was going somewhere I didn't want to go. I hopped off the freeway, ran through to go home, and I remember somebody telling me about the bush, and I seen this plant and the bush, and I was like, that's the plant. I picked the whole fucking bush, and I took it home with me, big old bush of Datura. Got home, put it in a fucking, you know, I always tell the story because, you know, you're supposed to make, especially with this plant, I don't even know what I'm doing. So I took a big pot, and they said, make a pot of it, drink a cup of it. All right, cool. We're Mexican, right? So the only pot we had was a big pozole pot, or a pot to make tamales. And so I put the whole thing in there. That was, you know, overkill. And then I did, and then what happened was, they said drink a cup of it. Okay, cool. I look in the cabinets. Only cups we had were big old plastic Tupperware cups. So sure enough, boom, boom. Long story short, uh, I went wigging it off 3 days. Best hallucinations I've ever had. But that ultimately set the tone for my mental health issues and things of that nature. This was mind you after like my fourth camp sentence. I had already started abusing drugs. See, at the age of 13, I was into the streets, the gangs. I always wanted to be a gang member, but my stepdad beat it out of me. So I found another direction, which was graffiti. So as a kid, I started writing everywhere, graffiti. I was noticed by some older people, like almost they were 20, I was 13, 12. So I got in where I fit in, and with that, you know, started drinking with these gentlemen, started doing, you know, methamphetamine for the first time. You know, I started smoking crack, you know, and just due to my curiosity, because, you know, as a kid, like I said, they said dare, and I was like, dare what? Dare to do this stuff? Cool, I'm gonna do it. Anyway, so that's where that's where it began for me. And through the process of that, you know, I didn't start drinking alcohol until later, which I'm gonna explain a little bit. So I started smoking weed, doing a lot of LSD in high school, a lot of acid. I smoked a lot of crack. I liked the way it felt. I don't know. So for me, my chemical imbalance, I guess, as I found out later, you know, I was probably one of the kids that needed Ritalin. You know, I was very hyper, high strung, ADD, ADHD, and you know, as I got older, I became an adult. When I noticed when I smoked methamphetamines, I was normal. I was like, wow, I don't feel how I used to feel. I could focus. I could be creative. I used to be in the dark because my kid was be sleeping, and I'd try to play it off, and I would literally draw like a Mona Lisa in the dark, like perfect to a T in the dark. You know what I'm saying? That's how my chemical imbalance worked for me, the meth, right? And when I did the meth, I found I just that was what I had been missing, like off the chemical imbalance, off the because I could never behave as a kid. I was always in trouble. I was always suspended. I got expelled from preschool, from breaking into classrooms, destroying things, fighting all the time, stealing all the time, not listening. I was very bad. I was that kid. You know what I'm saying? And not to glorify it or anything, but I didn't know. Who knew? My mom didn't know what to do with me. She married this man, and when I was 4, that didn't know what to do with me either. So ultimately, what this dude did was beat my ass all the time because he didn't know how to deal with me. He, obviously, later on, I found out as an adult he had addiction problems. He was crazy. He was a weirdo, and questionable things and stuff like that happened. To where ultimately, as the coursework states, trauma triggers a lot of addiction and things like that. People, I was very I was depressed. I didn't know anything about none of this stuff, mind you. So I was depressed, and um, my moods were off, and I guess now I don't use it as a crutch. I don't claim schizo. I don't claim bipolar, but I have these things wrong with me, anyways. And I didn't start finding out and diagnosed with any of this stuff until I was already like 16, already doing 2 years, 3 years into my sentences, and things like that. So obviously I got on medication, and I tried to figure it out. Obviously I didn't like the medication, so what happened was, I once I got out and I hit the streets again, in my environment, and I started hanging out with the people. The 90s, the environment that I grew up in, there was graffiti, and then it went to tag banging. Everybody wanted to be a gang member. That was the cool at the time. It was the thing to do with my friends, my people, my family. I had to stay. I had to survive. I had to stay alive. So the choices that are made for me ultimately put me in that position, and that's what I did, right? And in this, I knew I had issues with my mental health. So what happened was, I started using drugs to hide the pain, to hide the depression, to hide the anger, because I would get angry all the time. And I noticed that when I did the meth, or when I did certain things, um, I didn't get angry. I calmed me down. So with that being said, I used and abused, and I continued to do the thing. My environment put me in a position for me to have to survive. So I became a gang member. I joined the gang, and I enjoyed that life, though. That was something that I enjoyed. Like, and people now, like, even with addiction or these things, being because that I'm 3 years in recovery now from every substance. And with that being said, is you know um the choices that I made is because I wanted to be tough. I wanted to be that guy. Like I said, my family come from a family of genetic disorders, gang members, angry, crazy, psycho, schizos, all that stuff. You know what I'm saying? And that's who I wanted to be, better than my dad or my uncles or my cousins and things like that. So I went wild, and ultimately, on one of my last sentences as a kid, I would come home from like home visits, and I started smoking meth with one of my friends, and more meth. And the meth ultimately, you know the meth uh, the meth was a big thing for so many years, 10 plus years, 11 plus years, maybe 20 years. I smoked methamphetamines. I stopped meth for a while because obviously it went from, it went from a choice, and then it went to addicting state, and then obviously I was using it regular. But see, the thing for me is that through my experience, I didn't JCat it, that we say. I wasn't staying in my room all weird and being fucking weird. I would like be in the streets. But see, when I smoked the meth, it was too high and too intense, so I would have to drink. This is where my alcohol became a problem as well. So if I didn't have no alcohol, I would smoke the meth. You know what I'm saying? They call me the aluminum lung because I used to smoke fucking meth off of foil. I put the little thing in the foil and go shh. I didn't. I put the shard right there, and I just freebased it like intense. You know what I'm saying? That's how my genetic makeup in my mind was. I was intense. I'm very high strung. Even now that I don't do anything, I'm still addicted to the stimulant part of it, which I come to understand now. Like coffee, I don't smoke meth, but I'll drink 2 Red Bulls to the neck, get all my stuff done, and then and I stopped drinking Red Bull because obviously it was affecting my heart and I was feeling weird. So I went to coffee because obviously the caffeine part of it. So I'm drinking uh, mocha frap with double shot espresso, but what is it? Blonde shot. So obviously you can see where that is. The stimulant part is what what I lack and needing that feeling. You know what I'm saying? So the meth for years took over my life, ran rapid, and ultimately the methamphetamine put me in a position for me to catch a criminal case. I'm not gonna go into details. The case is over, but I assaulted some people with a firearm and took on a high-speed pursuit, and you know, I stopped. I went to jail, and I didn't want to do meth in jail because I don't want to be locked in a little box all like high strung. So I stopped. And then when I got out, I started doing it again. I met my wife, and you know, I started doing drugs again. At first, I came out all swollen and everything, but then the drugs got me again. Sure enough, I went on a binge again for 3 years, 4 years, and then I had my daughter. And then ultimately one day, what got me was I was trying to draw again, like the fucking all tweakers do. We go to color and shit, and um, I was trying to be sneaky around it, and I noticed my baby looking at me like, "What's wrong with this fool? Like, what's wrong with him?" But from a baby's perspective, like, what's wrong? Like, maybe she's seen a spirit, because all these substances and drugs, they come with an entity or a spirit with them. I don't know anybody's religious preference. I'm not here to convince anybody anything, but with that, for me, I know that that was it. So my daughter is 8 years old, and it's been 8 years since I did methamphetamines, and I stopped that right at there. I figured, oh, okay, well, at least I'm not doing that. Let me hop on this next thing. So the alcohol was my last one, right? Now, mind you, the crack was still involved. I was smoking crack, doing coke. At least I'm not doing meth. That shit driving me nuts, right? So, but it didn't. My addiction and my tendencies of addiction push me to do. I hop off one, I hop on the next, hop on one, hop until I'm over it. Luckily, I have a strong willpower, which I'm able to stop. That's the great thing about me, my perseverance, my ability to persevere and have the willpower to stop. You know what I'm saying? Because I used to smoke cigarettes all day long, Camel non-filters. Once I stopped smoking the meth, I stopped smoking the cigarettes. Go figure. And so, with that being said, I still drank, and alcohol was my last vice for me. You know what I mean? So, and then what happened was the alcohol kept drinking, and alcohol for me was a depressant. I thought I was always self-medicating, this and that, and it just made me worse. It made my manic depressive, made my unresolved issues worse. I always say it enhanced my craziness because my lifestyle up until this point, 3 years ago, when I caught an attempted murder charge because of my alcoholism. I was blacking out, the aggressive, the PTSD. I had a great job. I was working at Northrop, you know what I mean? But I had these unresolved issues, and I had these problems with myself, and I didn't know what it was. And I would always be in the process, going on benders and binges and assaulting people and worrying about people trying to kill me and things like that, or me doing crazy shit. I always be like, man, I should stop. I want to stop. And I always say, be careful what you ask for, because God will give it to you. And He did. He put me in that position. Unfortunately, somebody almost died, and it was somebody that I knew, and not going to the details, but I'm glad the situation happened. Not that he was almost died, but because it was able for me to stop my shit and be put on a trajectory toward the blessings and the person that I am now. So yeah, man, I would say that's a little bit of that's in a nutshell. So yeah, I definitely have the experience as far as addiction, and from present to past. Now my addictions are these Red Bulls, coffee, stimulants, women sometimes, it's fine, it's hard, what I'm saying, the algorithms and these things know, and it's hard to stop. It's hard, it's all around us. There's things like even in the coursework it's stated, by the media, social media stuff, and they put these things and they glorify women, drug use, alcohol, partying, and ultimately it keeps a person that has personality traits like myself kind of entrapped in it. But ultimately, in learning through the coursework, it's a choice. These are choices that we make. You know what I'm saying? And as you progress and learn these things, I mean, it makes it evident and for the person to change. I'm gonna read this real quick. That's my addiction part, but that way you can get a little bit of understanding. Pretty much what I said in the nutshell. But as for me, the way my genetic makeup was, and I started using drugs, I used a severe and massive amount of substances during my time period, were ultimately affecting my dopamine and serotonin releases. I needed more and more to feel, and to feel in general. Also, in the perspective that I had an anger disorder called the fits of rage, and being that I used substances for many years, alcohol and a variety of drugs, I burned these receptors out. By me doing drugs and getting angry, I was able to feel. yeah, I was able to feel. I didn't feel anymore. So by doing this, I was able to feel again, and relating to the fact that my genetic makeup was already an issue due to my family bloodline. I once started using substances, drugs, and alcohol. It ultimately set me on a downward spiral or into a point where it was continuous because I enjoyed it. My lack of chemical or my chemical imbalance brain ultimately affected me so that I need stimulation to make me feel better. Even now, for the ADHD, from my perspective, I stopped using drugs. I don't do drugs at all or drink anything, but I'm still hyper. I have ADD, ADHD, and ultimately that's what does it for me. I became addicted to other things when I stopped using drugs and substances. I became addicted to other stimulants that are legal. For example, Red Bulls, energy drinks, which is the caffeine part of it, which is a stimulant. Also, I stopped one thing, hopped on another, which now I'm drinking coffee excessively, specifically espresso shots, preferably because ultimately it balances out the lack of chemical, the serotonin in my brain, making me feel good. I am the one that can drink coffee and go to bed. So ultimately, my genetic makeup from the beginning was different than others, to where once I tried something or did something, it was all receptors lit up, and I became addicted faster and do anything in my power and my willpower to get high, to get loaded, to feel the same feelings that the body naturally produces when you're happy. Um, to get these regular feelings, because I am an excessively or over excessive person. So when I do something, I do it to the max, all the way 1,000% or nothing. I'm very high strung, very hyper aggressive, and that's my life situations in my genetic makeup ultimately had that effect when I started using substances, one or the other, stopping. I was individual seeking more simulation, more drink, more drugs. My brain lit up and finally feeling the need that I have been searching for. As the result, downward spiral for many years of addiction, years in jail, anger, ultimately catching the attempted murder charge, and the whole 9 yards. Funny enough, when it comes to addiction and genetics makes of the individuals, being a kid, the perspective and the way that my mind works, if somebody told me not to do something, ultimately my first instinct or natural instinct was to want to do it. So as a kid, when people would tell me not to do something, such as their program, I did it. Right? I was inquisitive and wanted to try, and definitely when the time came, I did also. When I had issues with depression and anxiety, so I used substances to self medicate or feel or not feel, and whatever situation came first. Also, the trauma I accumulated from a terrible childhood abuse, beating, some sort of weird issues. For I had bipolar, low self esteem before becoming involved in the streets, the gangs, self medicating, but making things worse, not knowing that the substance I was using was making my situation worse. And Nate, obviously, the substance made my depression, anxiety, and my bipolar rage, impulsive problems all worse than a normal person. I also, growing up and the time I did, it was taboo, and the disorders, it was like a stigma, you know what I'm saying, of this addiction. Not my single mom, while not knowing what to do, and she left me for the wolves. With the man obviously that took his frustration and anger out on me because he didn't know how to deal with me. So, and he had his own issues. So yeah, he traumatized me, and so in the so yeah, and then the most important part of my addiction and my addiction definition of this to me is the recovery part, because that's it's because it's recovery, right? I learned that in the SUD field. The SUD field is always, like upgrading, updating with new ways to, you know, um, help patients, patients recover and stay recovered. Often, growing and change. It changes often that this field, and new ways to, for groups and organizations and resources to help people not only recover but stay recovered. It's things like AA. I'm an active member in AA. I'm a sponsor. I'm a sponsor. I have. I am a sponsee. So if somebody sponsors me, I'm active in as a secretary. Things of that nature. I work in Mental Health of America, so I work with people every day, sharing my lived experience with people, and helping them understand that there is hope in recovery and addiction if you want to change. So with all this being said, when I got into recovery and this time around and my life was on the line, I learned. I wanted to. The choice was the choice. Like, I made choices to do bad shit. This time around, the choice was for me to want to learn my underlying issues and figure out what my problem was, and I did. I did my step work. I figured it out. I figured I'm selfish, you know. It's the whole 9 yards. I'm not gonna go into details, but I figured it out and I'm working on it slowly. So that's what I do now. I work with people with mental health issues, drug issues, and I show them there is a different way. According to the National Institute of Drug Abuse, recovery is a process of change to people involved with their health and wellness, self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. Which for me, in hand, I am in recovery. I've been in recovery from substance for 3 years. Um, and that's where I stand. There is, it's pretty much I repeat a lot of the stuff that I, shared with you guys. But yeah, that's for me. The recovery part is the most important part of my story because as I've come this far in my life, my recovery is important to me because I don't want to give back the life that I have now. The life that I have now is way better than the life that I had before. I'm not perfect, far from it. I'm human. I make mistakes sometimes, but nothing to the extent of me, hurting somebody again or putting myself in a position to where I lose everything I worked so hard to get back. I got a job again. Ultimately I lost my house, my job, everything when I caught this case, and it all stems from addiction. It all stems from the fact that I was trying to find something something to fill the void that I had in me, which was the trauma and all the genetic stuff that it came with it, and my PTSD from being in the streets, fighting this, that, the other, and it put me in a position to lose everything, and I don't want to give it back. So, I'm here. I'm doing my SUD courses now, and there's little bumps in the road now, but I'm gonna, just like when I fought to fight that case, I received a mental health diversion for that case. But ultimately, I had to do the footwork. I had to put in the work. I had to meet God halfway, and I made it happen. I didn't sit around on my ass and cry like, "Oh, please, God, let have mercy." No, I did. But then I was like, "How could we figure this out?" And I meditated and I listened. And I listened to the ideas and the thoughts that came in my head and were telling me, "Do this, that," and I did it right. And I made it happen. So that's what I'm doing now. The little issues that I might be having are nothing. I'm gonna give it 100%. And if it doesn't work out, at least I know that I gave it my all. And need be, what I'm saying, just continue to grow and continue to, because even at my job, they give me a point and a place in the new hire-ons. I train new hires and I share my lived experience. I'll come in a couple of weeks at my organization because of my story and the miracle that I have and the person that I've become. They're gonna bring a news crew in for me and interview me and place me on the MHALA webpage and showcase who I am and what I've been through. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, I'm far from it. I'm far from perfect, but I'm not the person I used to be. Definitely, and it's all because I made the choice to stay in recovery, to not do substances or alcohol or drugs. You know what I mean? My life is better. I always thought that I wouldn't be me, or I'm a bitch, or I couldn't do the things that I wanted. I wouldn't be funny. I wouldn't be happy. I couldn't have sex without drugs. None of that. It made it better. It makes life better. And you know what I mean? And the effects of helping people and doing the right thing and showing people that there is hope and sharing people and the little things, the little wins, they last. The release of serotonin and the things, the effects of the release of that feeling lasts longer than the instant gratification can ever. The instant gratification is just for the moment, but the life I have now is way better. So, with that being said, that's my assignment. It is what it is. Thank you, appreciate it. This is gonna probably be on YouTube somewhere. So, if the world sees it, show some love, tap in. I appreciate y'all. God bless.